All right, here we go. Chapter 21 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Now, this is not a typical reading. I'm not just going to read the words. This is an opportunity to talk about interesting vocabulary or interesting phrases that we see in the book. So, if you're learning English or if you just like to talk endlessly about words and phrases and what people mean, what people are really talking about in the book, then you're welcome to contribute. And we're doing this live, so if you're watching this live with me, I really encourage you to ask questions, make comments. Encourage you to ask questions, make comments, and be involved, because that's the whole point of this, is to ask questions, talk about the words that we don't understand or the phrases. Sometimes I don't understand what they're talking about. It's a pretty complicated book. Well, before we start reading chapter 21, we should talk about what happened in the previous chapters. The title of this chapter is Little Emily, and yesterday we read chapter 20. And Davy was in London. He's a young man now. He's 18, feels very independent. He's all alone. He's got money. He's dressed nicely. And he meets his old school friend, Steerforth. And Steerforth invites him home for a few days. And Davy agrees to go. And while they're there, Davy mentions, I'm going to go to, where is it? I think Yarmouth, is where, a fishing village. I think it's Yarmouth. I'm getting confused. So many towns. And he's going there to see his old nursemaid. So the woman who took care of him when he was a baby. It's kind of like his grandmother. And he loves her very much, and she loves him very much. And he's going there to kind of reflect about, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? Because he just graduated from kind of the equivalent of high school. And his aunt, who was taking care of him, said, well, why don't you go away and think about what you want to do? Go visit Peggotty. That's the name of Davy's nursemaid. So that's where he's going. He did spend some time there before, when he was a little boy, during a very difficult time, because his father died before he was born. And let's see, we've got Wellington Cardoso says, hey, Professor, again here. Hi, Wellington, how are you doing today? And we've got Stillwaters here. Good evening, how are you? I'm fine, Stillwaters, how are you? Great way of using Ramble On. That was perfect. I just saw that before we started. Okay, so Davy did spend some time there before, when he was a little boy, during a very difficult time of his life, because his father died before he was even born, and his mother was very young and scared, and she decided to remarry while Davy was, I don't know, maybe he was 5 years old or 6 years old at the time, and she married a horrible, horrible man. He didn't like Davy, and Davy didn't like him. And for a while, they sent him away to stay with Peggotty's family, to stay with her brother, who lives in an old shipwreck on the beach. Kind of a cool place. I think I would love to live in an old shipwreck on the beach. And Peggotty's brother's a very wonderful man. He takes care of people. He takes care of a lot of people who are in need of food and shelter and love. He's a very good man. And one of the people that he takes care of is a little girl, or was a little girl named Emily, who was his niece. I think his brother died fishing. They're all fisher folk. So Peggotty's brother's like a father to Emily, but really he's her uncle. And Davy kind of fell in love with her when he was a little boy, and she was a little girl. But then he had to go away, and some horrible things happened to him in his life. He had to work in a horrible place in London. He ran away to stay with his aunt, and he hasn't seen little Emily in 10 years, or about 10 years, since they were little. And now he's going back there, and of course he's thinking about her because he was in love with her. That was his first love. And he has invited his friend Steerforth, who seems to be not a very nice guy, actually. Davy loves him. He really loves him. But it seems like I'm beginning to think he's not such a very nice guy, actually. But Davy invited him to come along, and Steerforth was very excited. He said, yes, I want to come, definitely. Who doesn't want to live in a shipwreck on the beach? All right, so that's the title of this chapter, Little Emily. So let's see what happens with Davy and little Emily in this chapter. So now I guess they're leaving London on their way to, I think, Yarmouth. Let's see. All right. There was a servant in that house, a man, I think maybe he's still at Steerforth's mother's house in London. I think that's the house that they're referring to here. There was a servant in that house, a man who I understood was usually with Steerforth and had come into his service at the university. So this is Steerforth's private servant, who was in appearance a pattern of respectability. I believe there never existed in his station a more respectable-looking man. He was taciturn. Well, let's take a look at that word, taciturn. I think it means serious, but I don't trust my definition here, so let's see, taciturn. Reserved or uncommunicative in speech, saying very little. So a taciturn person. This is not an extremely common word. This is a pretty advanced English word. Look at me, I'm looking it up just to be sure about what it means. So taciturn is a person who does not like to speak, who says very little. So Steerforth's manservant was very taciturn. He didn't like to speak. I believe there never existed in his station a more respectable-looking man. He was taciturn, soft-footed. I think that means maybe that when he walks, you don't hear him, which maybe would be a quality that you would admire about a servant. Very quiet in his manner, deferential, observant, always at hand. If something is at hand, that means it's always close to you, always very convenient to you. So nobody ever says, where is he? He's always there ready. He's always at hand. If something is at hand, it is very close to you, very ready. Always at hand when wanted, and never near when not wanted. So he was always right there and ready when you needed him, but when you didn't want him around, he wasn't around. He was like the perfect servant. He had not a pliant... Wait, I think I skipped a line. But his great claim to consideration was his respectability. He had not a pliant face. We better look up that word, pliant. Wow, I'm in trouble. I'm already looking up 2 words just in the first paragraph. Being readily flexible or supple. I thought pliant because, you know, there's the word pliable, which means you can change the shape of it. If something is pliable, it's easy to change the form of it. So if it says he had not a pliant face, I guess that means that his facial expression never changes very much. It always stays the same, because pliant means it could change. He had not a pliant face. He had rather a stiff neck. Stiff means it doesn't move. So if he has a stiff neck, it means he doesn't really move his head very much. Rather a tight, smooth head with short hair clinging at its sides. clinging is when something holds very tight. So if his short hair is clinging to the sides of his face, you can imagine his hair is not like this. It goes like this and sticks to his face. With a peculiar habit of whispering the letter S so distinctly that he seemed to use it oftener than any other man. So he was very good at pronouncing the letter S. I don't think that I'm very good at pronouncing the letter S, actually. I don't know how to fix that. But this guy, this servant, he's very good at pronouncing the letter S. And Davy's saying he pronounces it so well that he seems to use words with S's on purpose just to practice, just to show people how wonderful he is. If his nose had been upside down, he would have made that respectable. So if his nose had been upside down in the reverse, pointing in the reverse way, people would admire that about him. He was so perfect. Anything he did was perfect. He surrounded himself with an atmosphere of respectability and walked secure in it. It would have been next to impossible to suspect him of anything wrong. He was so thoroughly respectable. Thoroughly means 100%, completely. He was 100% respectable, completely, absolutely respectable. Nobody could have thought of putting him in a livery. A livery is a place where you keep horses. So I think that would probably be a low job, taking care of the horses. And I think that's why he said nobody would ever think about putting him in the livery to take care of the horses. He was too good. He should be in the house. He was so highly respectable. To have imposed any derogatory work upon him. Derogatory means insulting. So that would be insulting to ask him to take care of the horses, because he's much better than that. He's much more skilled and talented. Let's read that again. To have imposed any derogatory work upon him would have been to inflict a wanton insult on the feelings of a most respectable man. That word wanton, that's a pretty interesting word. I think you could, it's kind of an old-fashioned word, but I think you could still use it and it would be kind of impressive. And the definition is cruel or deliberate or unprovoked. So wanton behavior is very ugly behavior, not very nice behavior. Used to mean, it's not used this way anymore, but it used to mean like people having sexual relations in a very open, unashamed way. So, if you read a book from 150 years ago and you see the phrase wanton woman, that means a woman who has a lot of free sex and doesn't care what people think, unrestrained. But they don't use it like that anymore. Now it just means cruel or not nice or something like that. So let's see, how are they using it here? It would have been to inflict a wanton insult on the feelings of a most respectable man. So it would have been a very cruel insult to ask him to take care of the horses in the livery. And of this I noticed, the women servants in the household were so intuitively conscious that they always did such work themselves, and generally while he read the paper by the pantry fire. Such a self-contained man I never saw. Self-contained, to me that means like independent, but let's see. Maybe not needing anybody else or not wanting to be around anyone else. But let me see what Google says. Complete, having all that is needed in itself. Yeah, like being independent. Quiet, the definition here is quiet and independent. And Davy says, such a self-contained man I never saw. Such a very uh, independent and quiet person I never saw. And I think the independent part was maybe he could do all of the work himself if he needed to. He didn't need the help of other people. But in that quality, as in every other he possessed, he only seemed to be more respectable. Even the fact that no one knew his Christian name, that means his first name. No, they probably just called him by his family name, so nobody had any idea what his first name was, his Christian name. And it seemed to form part of his respectability. Nothing could be objected against his surname. Surname is the last name, the family name. That's a surname. Litimer. So nothing could be objected against his surname. That means that if you hear that name, you wouldn't say Litimer. Like maybe that's a famous family name for doing bad things or something like that. It's a respectable family name. Stillwater says, does self-contained commonly used in real-life conversation? Actually, you might see that in an advertisement for an apartment. A self-contained apartment would mean, well, let's see. What is it? I still have self-contained here. Every section of the painting is a self-contained unit. Wait a minute. Yeah, you will see it. It just means very independent. Now I'm going to look up self-contained apartment. A self-contained accommodation such as a flat has all its own facilities so that a person living there does not have to share rooms or such. Okay, so imagine, imagine if you're reserving an Airbnb and they advertise it as a self-contained room. That means it has everything you need. A bathroom, a little kitchen or something to cook, all of the things that you need. And I would even think, and I don't know, so don't trust me on this, but I would even think it means it has its own entrance. Like you don't have to walk through the house or walk through the building. There's a separate entrance. So yes, you will see self-contained being used in things like an advertisement for an apartment or an Airbnb or something like that. So you can definitely use that. It just means very independent. Doesn't need anything else. Or doesn't rely on anything else. Nothing could be objected against his surname, Litimer, by which he was known. Peter might have been hanged or Tom transported, but Litimer was perfectly respectable. So even his name, his family name, was very respectable. It was occasioned, I suppose, by the reverend nature of respectability in the abstract, but I felt particularly young in this man's presence. How old he was himself I could not guess, and that again went to his credit on the same score, for in the calmness of respectability he might have numbered 50 years as well as 30. Let's read that paragraph again. It was occasioned. That kind of means like it happened. But let's see. It was occasioned, I suppose, by the reverend nature of respectability in the abstract. Okay. He's saying, in plain English, this is pretty complicated English, but in plain English, he's saying, I don't know why, but when I was near him in his presence, I always felt younger than I actually was. That's really what he's saying. We don't have to go through the explanation of all those words because that's not how people talk anymore. So let's not worry too much about that. But I felt particularly young in this man's presence. How old was he himself? I could not guess. And that again went to his credit. So Davy's saying, I don't even know how old he is. Maybe he's 50, maybe he's 30. But even that's kind of respectable, how he doesn't have an aged look about him. Okay, Litimer was in my room in the morning before I was up to bring me that reproachful shaving water. Do you remember that when Davy was staying in the hotel, he was very embarrassed because, this is his first time out being independent, and he's in London, and he's going to shows, and he's having a wonderful time, feeling very adult, very mature. But in the morning, the maid of the hotel brought the equipment for shaving. And that was very embarrassing for Davy because he doesn't have any hair on his face. He doesn't need to shave. And he even got paranoid and thought that the maid was making fun of him, mocking him, joking about him. And even now, Latimer has brought the shaving equipment for Davy, which is annoying him. Okay, let's see. And to put out my clothes. When I undrew the curtains, so that means when I opened the curtains and looked out of bed, I saw an equable temperature of respectability, unaffected by the east wind of January, and not even breathing frostily, standing my boots right in the left first dancing position, and blowing specks of dust off my coat as he laid down like a baby. As he laid it down like a baby. Okay, so when he says I opened the curtains, he is talking about the curtains of the bed. So, let's see. Let's take a look at that. But you probably know what that means. You've probably seen that. But before buildings were heated very well, if you lived in a cold place, it was a good idea to have a bed like this. Because at night you could close the curtains and then it could be very warm or warmer in the bed area. So when he says I drew open the curtains, he's not talking about the window, he's talking about the bed. So he opens the curtains of the bed, and there's Latimer. It's January and very cold, but you can't even see his breath. Still waters, I know you're in Vancouver, right? I don't know, how cold does it get in Vancouver? In the wintertime, can you see your breath? Can you see the white puffs of breath in the air? Because Davy's saying, Latimer is so respectable that even in this cold room in the middle of January, you can't even see his breath. That's how perfect he is. Oh, you're in Toronto. So the other person, who was the other person? Fari Bros or Fari Boers. I can't remember his name or how to pronounce it. I think he's in Vancouver. Well, definitely then in Toronto, you can see your breath in the wintertime. That's for sure. Okay. Let's see. I gave him a good morning and asked him what o'clock it was. So I asked him what time it was. He took out his pocket, the most respectable hunting watch I ever saw, and preventing the spring with his thumb from opening far, looked at the face as if he were consulting an ocular oyster, shut it up again, and said, if I pleased, it was 8:30. Mr. Steerforth will be glad to hear how you have rested, sir. Thank you, I said. Very well indeed. Is Mr. Steerforth quite well? Thank you, sir. Mr. Steerforth is tolerably well. Another of his characteristics. No use of superlatives. Cool, calm, medium, always. Superlatives are words like very or extremely. So he's saying he's tolerably well. That's maybe fancy Victorian talk for he's okay. And then they say no use for superlatives, like he's not the kind of person who uses very or extremely or a lot, these big intensifying words. Is there anything more I can have the honor of doing for you, sir? The warning bell will ring at 9. The family take breakfast at 9:30. Nothing, I thank you. I thank you, sir, if you please. And with that, and with a little inclination of his head when he passed the bedside, as an apology for correcting me, he went out, shutting the door as delicately as if it had just fallen into a sweet sleep upon which my life depended. Every morning we held exactly this conversation, never any more and never any less, and yet invariably, however far I might have been lifted out of myself overnight and advanced towards maturer years by Steerforth's companionship, or Mrs. Steerforth's confidence, or Miss Dartle's conversation, in the presence of this most respectable man, I became, as our smaller poets sing, a boy again. So Davy's feeling very adult and very grown up. He's staying at his friend Steerforth's house. He doesn't have an adult accompanying him, his aunt. And he's feeling very adult, having adult conversations with Steerforth and Steerforth's mother and even Mrs. Dartle. And he's enjoying feeling grown up. But when he's in the presence of this servant, he's so powerful that Davy feels like a little boy. He got horses for us, and Steerforth, who knew everything, gave me lessons in riding. He provided foils for us, and Steerforth gave me lessons in fencing. Fencing is the art of a sword fight, of sword fighting. So just to take a look at a picture of fencing for a moment. This is fencing. Sword fighting as an art and a sport. Steerforth gave me lessons in fencing, so Steerforth was teaching him how to fight with a sword. And I began, of the same master, to improve in boxing. Boxing, I think you probably know. It gave me no manner of concern that Steerforth should find me a novice in the sciences. A novice means a new person, an amateur, a beginner. But I never could bear to show my want of skill before the respectable Litimer. So Davy is saying that he didn't mind it when Steerforth would teach him about sword fighting, or he wasn't embarrassed when Steerforth would teach him things about science that he didn't know. But when he was in the company of this servant, he was very embarrassed if he didn't know the right thing or know how to do something. It's kind of funny. I had no reason to believe that Litimer understood such arts himself. He never led me to suppose anything of the kind, by so much as a vibration of one of his respectable eyelashes. Yet whenever he was by, whenever he was near, while we were practicing, I felt myself the greenest and most inexperienced of mortals. So he was very embarrassed if he was learning things with Steerforth and the servant was present. He was very embarrassed if he didn't know something. You could say that the servant made Davy feel self-conscious. I think that's the word that we would use today for that. The week passed away in a most delightful manner. It passed rapidly, and as may be supposed, to one entranced as I was, and yet it gave me so many occasions for knowing Steerforth better, and admiring him in 1,000 respects, that at its close I seemed to have been with him for a much longer time. A dashing way he had of treating me like a plaything. Dashing to me means like beautiful, but for a man. So I don't know if you would ever say to a woman, "You look dashing," But that might be something that you would say to a man. You look dashing. I'm not sure if that's how he's using it here, though. A dashing way he had of treating me like a plaything. So Steerforth would treat him like a toy. But let's look up the word dashing to see if there's some other way to use it. Because my explanation doesn't make sense. As far as I can tell. Wait, let's see. Attractive, adventurous, and full of confidence, typically used of a man. Stylish or fashionable. Yeah, so it just seems like... How would you explain that? A dashing way he had of treating me like... So he treated me like a toy. But I think Davy didn't mind it. He enjoyed it. That's why he's saying dashing. That's what I think. So it's kind of insulting that Steerforth treated him almost like a toy, a plaything. But it was okay with Davy because he really loved and admired Steerforth. So he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the attention. A dashing way he had of treating me like a plaything was more agreeable to me than any behavior he could have adopted. It reminded me of our old acquaintance. Oh, that's why. Because when Davy first met Steerforth, Davy was just a little boy in that school, and Steerforth was one of the older boys. So, and he protected Davy. But, also he abused him a little bit because he's a little kid and Steerforth is kind of grown up. But that was okay with him at the time. And it's okay with him now because that makes him remember the school days, the good old days. It reminded me of our old acquaintance. It seemed the natural sequel of it. It showed me that he was unchanged. It relieved me of my uneasiness I might have felt in comparing my merits with his, and the measuring my claims upon his friendship by any equal standard. Above all, it was a familiar, unrestrained, affectionate demeanor that he used towards no one else. So another reason why Davy enjoyed this, in a way, it's kind of disrespectful treatment from Steerforth, because it was very intimate and personal. He didn't act that way with anyone else, so it made Davy feel special. As he had treated me at school differently from all the rest, I joyfully believed that he treated me in life unlike any other friend he had. I believed that I was nearer to his heart than any friend, and my own heart warmed with attachment to him. He made his mind to go with me into the country, and the day arrived for our departure. He had been doubtful at first whether to take Littimer or not, but decided to leave him at home. The respectable creature, satisfied with his lot, whatever it was, arranged our portmanteau on the little carriage. I think that's like a chest, a traveling chest to put your clothes and your belongings while you're traveling. The respectable creature, satisfied with his lot, whatever it was, arranged our portmanteau on the little carriage that was to take us into London, as if they were intended to defy the shocks of ages. So the servant put the box on the carriage and secured it very tightly so that nothing, no matter how much the carriage moved or the coach moved during the trip, nothing would be harmed or moved or destroyed. And received my modestly proffered donation with perfect tranquillity. We bade adieu to Mrs. Steerforth and Miss Dartle. That means we said goodbye. With many thanks on my part and much kindness on the devoted mother's. The last thing I saw was Littimer's unruffled eye, fraught, as I fancied, with the silent conviction that I was very young indeed. So the last memory Davy has of the servant is going away, saying goodbye, but Davy's thinking, oh wow, he really thinks I'm just a stupid kid. What I felt in returning so auspiciously to the old familiar places I shall not endeavor to describe. Endeavor means try, so I will not try to describe how I felt as I started going near the places where I grew up, where I was a little boy. So there are a lot of happy memories, but also a lot of horrible, painful memories there. We went down by the mail. I was so concerned, I recollect, even for the honor of Yarmouth. Yeah, Yarmouth is where he's going. And when Steerforth said, as we drove through its dark streets to the inn, that as well as he could make out, it was a good, queer, out-of-the-way kind of hole, I was highly pleased. Queer means strange. And hole, you can describe a business as a hole, but that's kind of an insult when you call a business a hole. I wonder what happens if we look for a picture of a hole in the wall. But some of the best places are holes in the wall. So sometimes it's used as an insult, but a lot of times it's kind of like a secret little place that most people don't know about. Wait, let's see, hole in the wall, business. Let's see, here's I don't know if that's really a hole in the wall. Okay, it's funny because I'm getting a lot of Chinese places. I don't know if this is Taiwan or China, but so a hole in the wall is like a little establishment, a little business. You could maybe walk past it and not even notice it or see it. You could walk past it maybe 1,000,000 times and never even notice it. And sometimes those are really great places, actually. So it's common, it's pretty common to refer to a place as a hole or a hole in the wall. And it could be an insult, meaning it's a horrible, dirty little rotten place, or it could mean like it's a nice little place that's difficult to see or difficult to notice. And an inn, of course, is like a small hotel, but you probably know that because that's still a very common word. Well, let's reread what Steerforth said about the hotel where they were staying. So it seems like they're already in Yarmouth, and they're walking through the streets to the inn, the little hotel. And as well as to make something out, because if it's dark, it's the middle of the night, it's not easy to see the details. So as well as he could make out, it's not easy to see, to know for sure. It was a good, queer means strange. It was a good, queer, out of the way. Out of the way means it's not on a main street. Maybe it's in a quiet area or a hidden area of the city. Kind of hole. So hole, that implies it's kind of a small little business. Maybe you could walk past it 1,000,000 times and never say, oh, that's a hotel. That's an inn. I was highly pleased, so that made Davy happy that Steerforth approved of the inn. We went to bed on our arrival. I observed a pair of dirty shoes and gaiters in connection with my old friend the dolphin as we passed the door. I'm not sure what that's in reference of. And breakfasted late in the morning. Steerforth, who was in great spirits. To be in great spirits means to be very happy, to be in a good mood. To be in bad spirits means to be depressed or in a bad mood, maybe a little bit angry. Steerforth, who was in great spirits, had been strolling about the beach before I was up, and had made acquaintance, he said, with half of the boatmen in the place. Moreover, he had seen in the distance that he was sure must be the identical house of Mr. Peggotty. So remember, the Peggottys live in a shipwreck. There's an old ship that came up from the ocean and landed on the beach. You can't push it back out. It's there sitting on the beach, and they turn that into a house. I think that's my dream house. I would love to live there. but that's so if Steerforth is walking along the beach and he sees a big boat sitting on the sand, he thinks, oh, that must be the Peggotty's house, because how many boats like that are sitting on the beach? With smoke coming out of the chimney, he had a great mind, he told me, to walk in and swear he was myself grown out of knowledge. So Steerforth was even thinking of playing a joke and knocking on the door, saying, "It's me, Davy," to see how they would react. "When do you propose to introduce me there, Daisy?" he said. "I'm at your disposal. Make your own arrangements." "Why, I was thinking that this evening would be a good time, Steerforth. When they're all sitting round the fire, I should like you to see it when it's snug." Remember, snug means nice and warm and comfortable. "It's such a curious place." Curious means strange. "I shall not give them any notice that we are here, you know," said I, delighted. "We must take them by surprise." "Oh, of course. It's no fun," said Steerforth, "unless we take them by surprise. Let us see the natives in their aboriginal condition." Well, that's not very nice, the way that Steerforth is referring to them, because Davy's just talking about having a little bit of fun, but Steerforth is talking about them in a condescending sort of way, looking down on them. "Though they are that sort of people that you mentioned," I returned. "Oh, now they're making fun of Mrs. Dartle." What? You recollect my skirmishes with Rosa, do you?" Rosa is Mrs. Dartle. That's her first name. He exclaimed with a quick look, "Confound the girl. I'm afraid of her. She's like a goblin to me." A goblin, in case you don't know what a goblin is, I guess we better look for pictures of goblins. It's like a ghost, like a little demonic ghost. Here's a goblin. That's a goblin. "She's like a goblin to me, but never mind her," so that means forget about her. "But what are you going to do? You're going to see your nurse, I suppose." "Why, yes," I said. "I must see Peggotty first of all." "Well," replied Steerforth, looking at his watch, "suppose I deliver you up to be cried over for a couple of hours. Is that long enough?" I answered, laughing, that I thought we might get through it in that time, but that he must come also, for he would find that his renown had preceded him, and that that was almost as great a personage as I was. So Steerforth is saying, "Okay, I'll go take you to Peggotty. I'll leave you there for a couple of hours so she can cry all over you. Is 2 hours enough time?" And Davy says, No, you have to come, because I write Peggotty all the time and tell her about you, my best friend. So you're very famous and they want to meet you." "I'll come anywhere you like," said Steerforth, "or do anything you like. Tell me where to come to, and in 2 hours I'll produce myself in any state you please, sentimental or comical." I gave him minute directions. Okay, you see that word, and you want to say minute, which means 60 seconds. But if you pronounce it minute, that means very detailed or very small. So I gave him very detailed directions for finding the residence of Mr. Barkis. Mr. Barkis is Peggotty's husband. I gave him minute directions for finding the residence of Mr. Barkis, carrier to Blunderstone and elsewhere, and on this understanding went out alone. There was a sharp, bracing air. The ground was dry, the sea was crisp and clear, the sun was diffusing abundance of light, if not much warmth. And everything was fresh and lively. I was so fresh and lively myself in the pleasure of being there that I could have stopped the people in the streets and shaken hands with them. So Davy is very happy to be there. He's in a very good mood, a very happy, excited mood. The streets looked small, of course. The streets that we have only seen as children always do, I believe, when we go back to them. But I had forgotten nothing in them, and found nothing changed, until I came to Mr. Omer's shop. Omer and Joram was now written up, where Omer used to be, but the inscription draper, trailer, haberdasher, funeral furnisher remained as it was. When Davy's mother died, he was staying with Mr. Peggotty, Peggotty's brother, on the beach. And he got sent away. I don't remember exactly what happened, but he had to go back home when his mother died. And he had to stop at this store where they were making the clothes and the coffin, the box where they were going to put her body. And that was the shop where he was stopping now. So he's stopping at this shop where they prepared his mother for her burial before he went home to see her dead. My footsteps seemed to tend so naturally to the shop door after I had read these words from over the way that I went across the road and looked in. There was a pretty woman at the back of the shop, dancing a little child in her arms, while another little fellow clung to her apron. I had no difficulty in recognizing either Minnie or Minnie's children. The glass door of the parlor was not open, but in the workshop across the yard I could faintly hear the old tune playing, as if it had never left me. So Davy was, when he was a little boy, sitting there waiting to go see his dead mother. He had to sit there and watch the girls making the clothes for his mother that she was going to wear to be buried. And out in the back, he could hear somebody banging a hammer for the entire time. And it was very distracting. Then at the end of his stay there, he realized, oh, that was the man making the box where they were going to put my mother's dead body. And he was saying, I can still hear that now. There's still somebody in the courtyard. I could still hear that sound. So somebody is making another box, just like that one. Is Mr. Omer at home? I said, entering. I should like to see him for a moment, if he is. Oh, yes, sir. He is at home, said Minnie. The weather don't suit his asthma out of doors. Joe, call for your grandfather. This little fellow, who was holding her apron, gave such a lusty shout that the sound of it made him bashful, and he buried his face in her skirt. To her great admiration, I heard a heavy puffing. That's puffing and blowing coming towards us. And soon Mr. Omer, shorter-winded. To be short-winded means you can't breathe. So if you're walking, and if walking makes you, you're short of wind. That's being short-winded. Mr. Omer, shorter-winded than of yore. Of yore means than in the past, because he was always like that. He was never able to breathe very well. I think he's fat. But now he's old and fat. So the days of yore means the days in the past, the long past. Mr. Omer, shorter-winded than of yore, but not much older looking, stood before me. Servant, sir, said Mr. Omer, what can I do for you, sir? You can shake hands with me, Mr. Omer, if you please, said I, putting out my own. You were very good-natured to me once, when I'm afraid I didn't show that I thought so. So, Davy was a little boy and his mother had just died and his stepfather hated him. He was he was headed towards a horrible future when he had to sit in that shop that day. I don't remember what happened in that shop, but I guess maybe Davy wasn't very nice to him, and now he's apologizing. Was I, though? Returned the old man. I'm glad to hear it, but I don't remember when. Are you sure it was me? Oh, quite. I think my memory has got as short as my breath, said Mr. Omer, looking at me and shaking his head, for I don't remember you. Don't you remember your coming to the coach to meet me, and my having breakfast here, and our riding out to Blunderstone? Blunderstone is the name of the place where Davy grew up. Well, the name of the house was the Rookery, so now I'm a little bit confused about Blunderstone. Why do they have two names? I don't remember why. Okay. You and I and Mrs. Joram and Mr. Joram too, who wasn't her husband then. Why, Lord bless my soul, exclaimed Mr. Omer after being thrown by surprise into a fit of coughing. A fit of coughing is coughing quite a bit in a short period. You don't say so. Minnie, my dear, you recollect? Dear me, yes. The party was a lady, I think. My mother, I rejoined. To be sure, said Mr. Omer, touching my waistcoat with his forefinger. And there was a little child, too. There were two parties. Oh, I forgot. When Davy's mother remarried, she had a little baby boy, but they both died together. The little party was laid along to the other party. Over at Blunderstone it was, of course. Dear me, and how have you been since? Very well, I thanked him, and as I hoped he had been too. Oh, nothing to grumble at, you know, said Mr. Omer. I find my breath gets short, but it seldom gets longer as a man gets older. I take it as it comes, and make the most of it. That's the best way, ain't it? Mr. Omer coughed again, in consequence of laughing. So he said, that's the best way, ain't it? He started coughing because he was laughing. And was assisted out of his fit by his daughter, who stood close beside us, dancing her smallest child on the counter. Dear me, said Mr. Omer. Yes, to be sure, two parties. Why, in that very ride, if you'll believe me, the day was named for my Minnie to marry Joram. Do name it, sir, says Joram. Yes, do, father, says Minnie. And now he's come into the business. And look here, the youngest. Minnie laughed and stroked her banded hair upon her temples. These are the temples here. As her father put one of his fat fingers into the hand of the child she was dancing on the counter. Two parties, of course, said Mr. Omer, nodding his head retrospectively. Exactly so. And Joram's at work at this minute on a gray one with silver nails. So they're talking about Joram is making another box. That's called a coffin. That's where the box where you put a dead body. And so Joram is making another one right now. A gray one. A gray one with silver nails. Not this measurement, the measurement of the dancing child upon the counter, by a good 2 inches. Will you take something? So he's offering him tea or some food or something like that. I thanked him but declined. Declined means no thank you. Let me see, said Mr. Omer. Barkis, the carrier's wife, Peggotty, the boatman's sister. She had something to do with your family. She was in service there, sure? My answering in the affirmative gave him great satisfaction. I believe my breath will get long next. My memory's getting so much so, said Mr. Omer. Well, sir, we've got a young relation of hers here, under article to us, and has as elegant taste in the dressmaking business, I assure you. I don't believe there's a duchess in England can touch her. So Mr. Omer is saying, you somehow know Peggotty, right? And Davy says, yes, yes. And he says, oh, we have a relation of hers working here. Well, that's interesting. Who could it be? She's making dresses, and she makes very good dresses. Not little Emily, said I involuntarily. Emily's her name, said Mr. Omer, and she's little, too. But if you'll believe me, she has such a face of her own that half the women in this town are mad against her. So Mr. Omer is saying she's so pretty that the other women of the town hate her, or half of the women of the town hate her. Nonsense, father, cried Minnie. My dear, said Omer, I don't say it. I don't say it's the case with you, winking at me. So Mr. Omer says she's very pretty. She's so pretty that the other girls, half of the girls in the town hate her. And Mr. Omer's daughter says, oh, stop it. And the father says, I'm not exaggerating. I never say it about you. And then he winks at Davy. He goes, that's winking. He winks at Davy. But I say that half the women in Yarmouth, and in 5 mile round, are mad against that girl. So not only half the women in the town, but also within 5 miles around the town, they all hate her because she's so pretty. Then she should have kept to her own station in life, father, says Minnie, and not have given them any hold to talk about her, and then they couldn't have done it. Oh, maybe it's not about looks. Maybe, well, let's see. Couldn't have done it, my dear, retorted Mr. Omer. Couldn't have done it? Is that your knowledge of life? What is there that any woman couldn't do that she shouldn't do, especially on the subject of another woman's good looks? Yeah, they are talking about her looks. I really thought it was all over with Mr. Omer after he had uttered that libelous pleasantry. He coughed to the extent that his breath eluded all his attempts to recover it with that obstinacy that I fully expected to see his head go down behind the counter. So he's got a really hard time breathing. And the last time he started coughing, having a coughing fit, Davy thought, oh wow, I think maybe he's going to die. And his little black breeches, with the rusty little bunches of ribbons at the knees, come quivering up in the last ineffectual struggle. At length, however, he got better, though he still panted. Panting is this. That's what dogs do when they're hot. So Mr. Omer was panting hard, and was so exhausted that he was obliged to sit on the stool of the shop desk. So he was so tired and not feeling well that he had to sit down. You see, he said, wiping his head and breathing with difficulty, she hasn't taken much to any companions here. She hasn't taken kindly to any particular acquaintances and friends, not to mention sweethearts. So Emily's got 2 problems. She's very pretty, so the other girls hate her. And she's not very friendly towards anyone, so she doesn't try to make friends with the other girls. And if boys like her, she always refuses them. And that makes everybody hate her. Let's see. In consequence, an ill-natured story got about. So that means that people started spreading rumors about her, talking about her behind her back. That it came into circulation principally on account of her something saying at the school that if she was a lady, she would like to do so-and-so for her uncle, don't you see, and buy him such and such fine things. So Emily is dreaming about, she's just a poor fisherman's daughter, and she doesn't even have a father. She's an orphan, and her uncle takes care of her. But she dreams about being a lady, being a rich woman, and being able to buy her uncle anything he wants. When you see that, let's see, buy him such and such fine things. When you see that phrase, such and such, it means like, you get it, you understand it. I don't have to tell you. I don't have to name the things. You could imagine a little girl who wants to buy her uncle, who she loves, fancy things. You could imagine it could be a car, a house. You don't have to mention it. You can just say such and such. She wants to buy him such and such fine things, and do so and so for her uncle. So if you wanted to, if you were rich and you wanted to do things for your uncle, what kind of things would you do for him? Maybe, I don't know, let him pay for his vacation, or I don't know what else. But that's the point. You don't have to mention it. You can just say do so and so. You don't have to talk about, you don't have to name the things. We get it. So let's read that again. If she was a lady, she would like to do so and so for her uncle. Buy vacations for him, take him to fancy restaurants. Don't you see? And buy him such and such fine things. Buy him a house, buy him a car. It's just a way of not naming something. But back then, that would be very offensive to talk about leaving your station in life. And that makes people angry. So that's kind of an offensive thing to talk about. It makes her sound like she's a very proud person, trying to be better than she is. I assure you, Mr. Omer, she said so to me, I returned eagerly, when we were both children. When they were children and playing on the beach, they used to fantasize about what they would do when they were growing older. And I think I do remember that Emily dreamed about being a lady, being a rich, elegant woman. Mr. Omer nodded his head and rubbed his chin. Just so. Then out of very little she could dress herself, you see, better than most others could out of a deal. And that made things unpleasant. So he's saying that even if Emily has very little, she manages to look very beautiful. And even girls with a lot of things and the money to buy beautiful clothes and beautiful things, they never look as beautiful as her. And this creates a problem for Emily. Jealousy. Moreover, she was rather what might be called wayward. Okay. You know, this word, W-A-R-D, you can see it in a lot of words like forward and backward and afterward. And that word means in the direction of. So if you say forward, for means front, in the direction of front, and backward, back means in reverse. So backward means in the direction of reverse. Afterward, it's about time, means after one event. In the direction of after one event. Wayward means going off in the wrong direction. So a wayward person is maybe a person doing bad things, going off in the wrong direction, not doing the right thing. And you can still use that word. It's still used. It's usually used with religious people might use that word, talking about someone who's going away from their religion. She's a wayward person. It means she's walking away from her religion. So that word wayward could mean many things. I'm not sure what it means here, but it means that she's doing bad things, or she's going off in the wrong direction in some way. Maybe, well, we'll find out, I guess. Let's see. I'll go so far as to say what I should call wayward myself, said Mr. Omer. Didn't know her own mind quite, a little spoiled, and couldn't at first exactly bind herself down. No more than was ever said against her, Minnie. No, father, said Mrs. Joram. That's the worst, I believe. So when she got a situation, said Mr. Omer, to keep a fractious old lady company, they didn't very well agree, and she didn't stop. And last she came here, apprenticed for 3 years, nearly... Do you remember when we were talking about the companion of Mrs. Steerforth. Oh God, now I can't remember. Miss Dartle. And it said that she was Miss Steerforth's companion because sometimes young ladies or older ladies would pay somebody to be kind of like their friend, like to go with them and do things like go have lunch, or the companion in movies, you see the companion is always reading a book to the rich lady. So it's kind of like a friend, but it's like a paid friend. And Emily got a job as a companion. So you see, it says here, so she got a situation. That means she got a job, said Mr. Omer, to keep a fractious old lady, a mean old lady company. And they didn't well agree. So her job was to be a companion to the old lady, to be like her friend, to follow her wherever she goes, read books to her, have meals with her, have conversations with her, so that she wouldn't feel lonely. But that this was not a nice old lady, and they didn't get along, so that didn't last. That didn't last very long. And then she, let's see, fractious old lady company. She didn't. They didn't very well agree. They didn't get along, and she didn't stop. At last, she came here, apprenticed for 3 years. So she, I guess, somehow she lost that job, and that's when she got the job with Mr. Omer. And she apprenticed for 3 years. An apprentice is like a student at a job, like an intern. That's really the old-fashioned way of saying an intern. But this is for 3 years. Usually an intern is like, I don't know, 6 months, right? At last she came here, apprenticed for 3 years. Nearly 2 of 'em are over, and she's been as good a girl as ever was. Worth any 6, Minnie. Is she worth any 6 now? Yes, father, replied Minnie. Never say I detracted from her. So they're saying she does a really good job here. She's been an apprentice for 2 years. She has 1 more year of training, but she's better than everybody else. And he asks his daughter, isn't that right? And she says, yeah, I would never say that she wasn't good at her job. Very good, said Mr. Omer. That's right. And so young, gentlemen, he added after a few moments, further rubbing his chin, that you may not consider me long-winded as well as short-breathed. I believe that's about it. So remember earlier when Mr. Omer was having trouble breathing, he's short of wind. That means he can't breathe. It's difficult for him to breathe. But to be long-winded means talking too much. If somebody is long-winded, they keep talking and talking and talking and they don't shut up. Rambling on is something that long-winded people do. We were talking about that word earlier, ramble on. And so Mr. Omer says, what did he say? It's kind of clever. So that you don't consider me long-winded, like I'm talking too much, as well as short-breathed. I believe that's about it. So he's saying, well, okay, we're finished talking. But in a very nice, clever way. As they had spoken in a subdued tone while speaking of Emily, I had no doubt that she was near. On my asking now if that were not so, Mr. Omer nodded yes, and nodded towards the door of the parlor. My hurried inquiry if I might peep in, remember peep is like a little quick look. We've already had that word. Let's see. My hurried inquiry if I might peep in. Can I peep in? Was answered with free permission. So he said, yeah, go ahead. And looking through the glass, I saw her sitting at her work. I saw her. A most beautiful little creature, with the cloudless blue eyes that had looked into my childish heart, turned laughingly upon another child of Minnie's, who was playing near her. With enough of willfulness in her bright face to justify what I heard, with much of the old capricious coyness. Coyness means shyness. lurking in it. But with nothing in her pretty looks, I'm sure. But what was meant for goodness and for happiness and for what was on a good and happy course. The tune across the yard, that's the man making the coffin. Tap, 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 that's the tune. The tune across the yard that seemed as if it never had left off, it never stopped. Alas, that's an old word that means finally. So, finally it stopped. It was the tune that never does leave off, was beating softly all the while. Wouldn't you like to step in, said Mr. Omer, and speak to her? Walk in and speak to her, sir. Make yourself at home. I was too bashful to do so then. Bashful means shy. I was too shy to do so. I was afraid of confusing her, and I was no less afraid of confusing myself. But I informed myself of the hour at which she left of an evening, and in order that our visit might be timed accordingly. And taking leave of Mr. Omer and his pretty daughter and her little children, went away to my dear old Peggotty's. So Mr. Omer said, "Go ahead, go inside and talk to her." And Davy said, "No, I can't, not now." But he did ask, "What time does she leave?" So that when he goes to Mr. Peggotty's house, he knows what time she will arrive. And then he said goodbye and went on to go see Peggotty. Here she was, in the tiled kitchen, cooking dinner. The moment I knocked at the door, she opened it and asked me what I pleased to want. So Davy knocked on Peggotty's door. They haven't seen each other in maybe 10 years. He was a little boy the last time she saw them. So she opened the door and she said, "Who are you? What do you want?" I looked at her with a smile, but she gave me no smile in return. I had never ceased to write to her, but it must have been 7 years since we had met. "Is Mr. Barkis at home, ma'am?" I said, feigning to speak roughly to her. Feigning means faking, pretending. So he said it in a rough way. "Is Mr. Barkis at home, ma'am?" I said, faking, pretending to speak roughly to her. "He's at home, sir," returned Peggotty, "but he's bad abed with the rheumatics." So she's saying, yes, he's at home, but he's in bed because he has really horrible arthritis. So he's very sick. When he's well, "Don't go over to Blunderstone now?" I asked. "When he's well, he do," she answered. So does he still? Because Mr. Barkis, he drives a coach. He drives a carriage. Actually, it's just a cart to and from Yarmouth and Blunderstone, where Davy's home, his childhood home, is. He's kind of like a taxi driver. He's like the 170, the Uber driver of 170 years ago. And so he says, "Don't he go to Blunderstone now?" I asked. "Well, when he's well, he do. So when he's not sick, he still does it." "Do you ever go there, Miss Barkis?" She looked at me more attentively. So, she doesn't recognize him, but now she's suspicious. Who is this guy? Why is he asking me these questions? And I noticed a quick movement of her hands towards each other. "Because I want to ask a question about the house there, that they call, what is it, the Rookery?" That's the house where Davy grew up, the Rookery. She took a step backward and put out her hands in an undecided, frightened way, as if to keep me off. So Peggotty doesn't know what to think, and she steps away. And Davy says, "Peggotty!" I cried to her. She cried, "My darling boy!" We both burst into tears, and we were locked in one another's arms. What extravagances she committed, what laughing and crying over me, what pride she showed, what joy, what sorrow, that she whose pride and joy I might have been, could never hold me in a fond embrace. I have not the heart to tell. I was troubled with no misgiving that it was young in me to respond to her emotions. I had never laughed and cried in all my life, I dare say, not even to her, more freely than that morning. So they were both so happy. Davy can't remember any time crying so hard and laughing so hard as when he met Peggotty that morning. Barkis will be so glad, said Peggotty, wiping her eyes with her apron, that it'll do him more good than pints of liniment. May I go and tell him that you're here? Will you come up and see him, my dear? Of course I would, but Peggotty could not get out of the room as easily as she meant to, for as often as she got to the door and looked round at me, she came back to have another laugh and another cry upon my shoulder. So she kept trying to go upstairs to tell her husband that Davy was there, but every time she tried to leave the room, she would run back and start crying and hugging him again. At last, to make the matter easier, I went upstairs with her, and having waited outside for a minute while she said a word of preparation to Mr. Barkis, presented myself before that invalid. I don't think that you can use that word anymore. I guess it's considered offensive. But invalid means someone who can't walk or maybe has to stay in the bed because they're sick. So invalid, it was a term that people use quite a bit, but I think now, I think you would have to say bedridden or bedbound. I think I hear people say that sometimes. But you shouldn't use invalid anymore. He received me with absolute enthusiasm. He was too rheumatic to be shaking hands with, but he begged me to shake the tassel on the top of his nightcap. A tassel, well, let's look at a nightcap and then we can see a tassel. Oh, I should type nightcap. So back in the old days, people would wear hats to bed. And these were called nightcaps. So here's a nightcap. And you see the nightcap is blue, but the white part, that's called a tassel. And so a tassel could be anything like that. Let's see, let's just do tassel alone. Let's see what kind of pictures we get. These are all tassels. They could be on curtains or furniture, all kinds of things. So Mr. Barkis has very, very bad arthritis. He can't shake hands. So, but he asked Davy to shake the tassel on his nightcap to say hello. He begged me to shake the tassel on the top of his nightcap, which I did most cordially. Cordially means like politely. When I sat down by the side of the bed, he said that it did him a world of good to feel as if he was driving me on the Blunderstone Road again. Earlier in the story, whenever Davy had to leave home, and sometimes that was usually for a bad reason, when his mother was getting married again, when he was going away to school, it was always Mr. Barkis who would take him to and from Yarmouth, where from Yarmouth you could get a coach, like a bus, to London or to some other place. So it was always necessary to use Mr. Barkis's Uber. And that's how Mr. Barkis married Peggotty, because when Davy was a little boy, Mr. Barkis used to say, how's Peggotty doing? Why don't you tell her about me? And so Davy kind of brought them together. He received me with absolute enthusiasm. He was too rheumatic to... Oh, wait, we already did that. When I sat down by the side of the bed, and he said it did him a world of good to feel as if he was driving me to Blunderstone Road again. Because that's, they have kind of that relationship, that happy memory. As he lay in bed, face upward and so covered, with that expectation that he seemed to be nothing but a face, like a conventional cherubim, he looked the queerest object I ever beheld. "What name was it, as I rode up in the cart, sir?" said Mr. Barkis, with the slow rheumatic smile. "Ah, Mr. Barkis, we had some grave talks about that matter, hadn't we?" "I was willin'." So Mr. Barkis, he does not speak a lot. He uses very few words. So one time he said to Davy when he was a little boy, "Tell Peggotty Mr. Barkis is willin'." Willing. Willing means wanting. And you could just understand from that word what it means is Mr. Barkis wants to marry Peggotty. But the message was Mr. Barkis was willin'. And so that's kind of something that they're remembering together, that when he asked Davy to deliver that message to Peggotty. "I was willin', a long time, sir," said Mr. Barkis. "A long time," said I. "And I don't regret it," said Mr. Barkis. "Do you remember what you told me once about her making all the apple pasties and doing all the cooking?" "Yes, very well," I returned. "It was true," said Mr. Barkis. "As turnips is, it's as true. It's true," said Mr. Barkis, nodding his nightcap, which was his only means of emphasis. "As taxes is, and nothing's truer than them." So I guess, I don't remember, but I guess Davy said that Peggotty was a very good cook. She made very tasty food. And Mr. Barkis is saying, it's true. It's all true. She makes very delicious food. Mr. Barkis turned his eyes upon me as if for my assent to this result of his reflections in bed, and I gave it. So Mr. Barkis looked at Davy to see if he agreed, and Davy agreed. "Nothing's truer than them," repeated Mr. Barkis. "A man as poor as I am finds that out in his mind when he's laid up. I'm a very poor man, sir." "I'm sorry to hear it, Mr. Barkis. A very poor man indeed I am," said Mr. Barkis. Here his right hand came slowly and feebly. Feebly means like very weakly. Here his right hand came up slowly and very feebly and under the bedclothes, and with a purposeless, uncertain grasp took hold of a stick, which was loosely tied to the side of the bed. After some poking with his instrument, in the course of which his face assumed a variety of distracted expressions, Mr. Barkis poked it against a box, an end of which had been visible to me all the time. And then his face became composed. "Old clothes," said Mr. Barkis. "Oh," said I. "I wish it was money, sir," said Mr. Barkis. "I wish it was indeed," said I. "But it ain't," said Mr. Barkis, opening both his eyes as wide as he possibly could. I expressed myself quite sure of that, and Mr. Barkis, turning his eyes more gently to his wife, said, "She's the usefulest and best woman, C.P. Barkis. All the praise that anyone can give to C.P. Barkis she deserves. And more, my dear. You'll get a dinner today for company. Something good to eat and drink, will you?" I should have protested against this unnecessary demonstration in my honor, but that I saw Peggotty on the opposite side of the bed, extremely anxious I should not, and so I held my peace. So Mr. Barkis is saying, "I'm very poor, but tonight we're going to spend a lot of money on a wonderful dinner for our guest, Davy." And Davy wanted to say no, but he saw Peggotty on the other side of the bed saying, "Don't let him do it. Let him spend the money." So he didn't say no. I got a trifle of money somewhere about me. Trifle means like a little bit, not very much, not very significant. "I've got a trifle of money somewhere about me, my dear," said Mr. Barkis, "but I'm a little tired. If you and Mr. David will leave me for a short nap, I'll try to find it when I wake." We left the room in compliance with this request. When we got outside the door, Peggotty informed me that Mr. Barkis, being now a little nearer than he used to be, always resorted to this same device before producing a single coin from his store. So he hides money in that box, but he says, "Oh, it's just old clothes." And he says, "I'm a little tired. Let me sleep. And maybe after I sleep, I will get the energy to find my little bit of money." But I guess that chest, that box, is full of money. But he doesn't like to spend it or let people know that he has it. Peggotty informed me that Mr. Barkis, being now a little nearer than he used to be, always resorted to this same device before producing a single coin. So he always did that. Every time he needed money, he would do this same thing. And that he endured unheard of agonies in crawling out of bed and taking it from that unlucky box. So it was actually very painful for him to do that because of his arthritis, but he wouldn't let anybody else touch that box or the money inside of it. In effect, we presently heard him uttering suppressed groans of the most dismal nature as this magpie proceeding racked him in every joint. But while Peggotty's eyes were full of compassion for him, she said his generous impulse would do him good, and it was better not to check it. So they could hear him on the other side of the bed, on the other side of the door, getting out of bed, groaning in pain, going to the box. It was very difficult for him to do, very painful, to get the money. But Peggotty was saying that this would be good for him, even though she felt bad that it was very painful. I have no doubt a martyrdom, and then called us in, pretending to have just woken up from a refreshing sleep, and to produce a guinea from under his pillow. His satisfaction in which happy imposition on us, and in having preserved the impenetrable secret of the box, appeared to be a sufficient compensation for him for all the tortures. So his happiness in giving the money and keeping his little secret box, everybody knew the money was in the box, but he doesn't understand that. He thinks it's a big secret. So keeping that little secret and also producing the money and being proud to be able to pay for a nice fancy dinner for everyone was worth all of the pain of going to the box. I prepared Peggotty for Steerforth's arrival, and it was not long before he came. I'm persuaded she knew no difference between his having been a personal benefactor of hers and a kind of friend to me, and that she would have received him with the utmost gratitude and devotion in any case. But his easy-spirited good humor, his genial manner — genial means like friendly — his handsome looks, his natural gift of adapting himself to whomsoever he pleased, and making direct, when he cared to do it, to the main point of interest in anybody's heart, bound her to him wholly in 5 minutes. His manner to me alone would have won her, but through all these causes combined, I sincerely believe that she had a kind of adoration for him. He left the house before he left the house that night. So Steerforth was very charming, and Peggotty really enjoyed his company and admired him in the same way that Davy admires him. He stayed there with me to dinner. If I were to say willingly, I should not half express how readily and gaily. Gaily means happily. He went into Mr. Barkis's room like light and air, brightening and refreshing it as if he were a healthy weather. There was no noise, no effort, no consciousness in anything he did, but in everything an indescribable lightness, a seeming impossibility of doing anything else, or doing anything better which was so graceful, so natural and agreeable, that it overcomes me even now in the remembrance. We made merry in the parlor. That means we had fun. People don't really talk like that anymore. You can still say making merry if you want, but it sounds very old-fashioned. But that just means we had fun. Merry means happy, like Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas. And to make merry means to make happiness, make fun. We made merry in the little parlor where the Book of Martyrs, unthumbed since my time, was laid upon the desk as of old, and where I now turned over its terrific pictures, remembering the old sensations they had awakened, but not feeling them, when Peggotty spoke of what she called my room, and of its being ready for me at night, and of her hoping that I would occupy it before I could so much as look at Steerforth, hesitating. He was possessed of the whole case. "Of course," he said, "you'll sleep here while we stay, and I shall sleep in the hotel." "But to bring you so far," I returned, "and to separate seems bad companionship." So Peggotty always kept a room in that house for Davy, and she said, whenever you need it, whenever you want it, this is your room, and you can live here forever if you want. But when Davy was in trouble, when he was a little boy, that was impossible to go there because they're from different levels of society. Davy is from a higher level of society than Peggotty. And if he had gone there, which he wanted to do, that would make big problems for her. She could be in a lot of trouble. So he couldn't go there, even though she really meant it. There was a room there for him, and she kept it all these years for him, even now. And now she's saying, "Oh, you have to sleep in that room tonight. That's your room." And he doesn't want to because, well, he wants to, but he doesn't want to abandon his friend Steerforth. He's saying, "I can't just leave you in that hotel." But Steerforth is saying, "No, do it, go." "But to bring you so far," I returned, "and to separate seems bad companionship, Steerforth." "Why, in the name of heaven, where do you actually belong?" he said. What is seems compared to that?" It was settled at once. What is seems compared to that? I don't really understand that sentence, to be honest with you. Let's keep going. He maintained all his delightful qualities to the last, until we started forth at 8 o'clock for Mr. Peggotty's boat. Indeed, they were more and more brightly exhibited as the hours went on, for I thought, even then, as I have no doubt now, that the consciousness of success and his determination to please inspired him with a new delicacy of perception, and made it, subtle as it was, more easy to him. If anyone had told me, then, that all this was a brilliant game, played for the excitement of the moment, for the employment of high spirits, and the thoughtless love of superiority, in a mere wasteful, careless course of winning what was worthless to him, and the next minute thrown away. I say, if anyone had told me such a lie that night, I wonder in what manner of receiving it my indignation would have found a vent. Oh, so Davy is writing this many years later. He's thinking about his childhood as an older man and writing about it. So he already knows what happens in the rest of the story. And now he's letting us know, Steerforth is so charming. Everybody loves him. But later I realized, and if you had told me at that moment the truth about Steerforth, I would not have believed you. I would say you're lying. But now he understands Steerforth better, and he's saying, Steerforth is only charming to get excitement out of people. He uses people for his own joy and his own pleasure, and then when he's bored with them, he throws them away. But at this moment, Davy doesn't understand that. He understands that as an older man writing this story, but not now. Stillwater says, English is a complex language. undoubtedly, I used to hire a native English teacher. That was how he told me. That's true. Well, every language is very complicated to learn. Chinese is a very complicated language to learn. Uh, the thing that makes this extra complicated is that people spoke very differently 170 years ago when this was written. They like to use different words, and they took a lot of trouble to phrase things in a very specific way. So even now, a native speaker reading this book, sometimes I don't understand exactly what they're saying. It's hard for me sometimes to understand it too, because the way that they choose to speak is much more complicated than the way that we speak now. But we try our best, and we learn some practical words too. Also some words that people don't use anymore. Let's see. So that's a very significant paragraph. Now Davy is saying, if you had told me how horrible Steerforth was back then, I wouldn't have believed you. So now he's telling us, he's giving us an indication that something bad, there's something bad about Steerforth. I walked beside him over the dark, wintry sands towards the old boat, the wind sighing around us. Remember, sighing is, that's sighing, but now the wind is sighing. Ooh, that's maybe the wind sighing, moaning really, and he uses the word moan a little bit further on here. So the dark, wintry sands towards the old boat, the wind sighing around us. Even more mournfully. Mournfully means sad, like crying. So the wind is like sighing and crying. Ooh. Then it had sighed and moaned upon the night when I first darkened Mr. Peggotty's door. This is a wild kind of place, said Steerforth, is it not? Dismal enough in the dark, he said. Dismal means depressing. Not very happy. Dismal enough in the dark, he said, and the sea roars as if it were hungry for us. Is that the boat where I see a light yonder? Yonder is an old word. It means over there. And sometimes people still use it, but it's not very common anymore. And the sea roars as if it were hungry for us. Is that the boat that I see, where I see the light yonder over there? That's the boat, said I. And it's the same boat I saw this morning, he returned. I came straight to it by instinct, I suppose. We said no more as we approached the light, but made softly for the door. Remember, we've seen that several times now, making for a place. So that means going to a place, but so if you say we went to the door, that's kind of boring. But if you say we made for the door, that means we went there with a specific purpose, with a goal. And of course, the goal is to get out to get into the house out of the horrible weather, and also to see Davy's friends. So it's just more interesting if you say we made for the door, because then we understand there's a purpose at the end of this. So we said no more as we approached the light, but made softly for the door. I laid my hand upon the latch, and whispering Steerforth to keep close to me, went in. A murmur of voices had been audible outside, and at the moment of our entrance, a clapping of hands, which latter noise, I was surprised to see, proceeded from the generally disconsolate Miss Gummidge. To console someone means to say, oh, it's okay, you'll be better. That's consoling someone. Oh, don't cry. Mrs. Gummidge is always very depressed and sad. She's a very miserable woman. So the disconsolate Mrs. Gummidge means she's never happy. You can never do this to her and make her happy. But Mrs. Gummidge was not the only person there who was unusually excited. So normally You could never make Miss Gummidge happy or excited, but even she was clapping and celebrating when Davy came in. Mr. Peggotty, his face lighted up with uncommon satisfaction, and laughing with all his might, he held his rough arms wide open, as if for little Emily to run into them. Ham, with a mixed expression in his face of admiration, exultation, and a lumbering sort of bashfulness that sat upon him, held little Emily by the hand, as if he were presenting her to Mr. Peggotty. Little Emily herself, blushing and shy, but delighted with Mr. Peggotty's delight, and her joyous eyes expressed, was stopped by our entrance, for she saw us first. In the very act of springing from Ham to nestle in Mr. Peggotty's embrace, in the first glimpse we had of them all, and at the moment of our passing from the dark, cold night into the warm light, this was the way in which they were all employed. Mrs. Gummidge in the background, clapping her hands like a mad woman, like a crazy woman. The little picture was so instantaneously dissolved by our going in that one might have doubted whether it had ever been. I was in the midst of the astonished family, face to face with Mr. Peggotty, and holding out my hand to him, when Ham shouted, "Master Davy! It's Master Davy!" In a moment we were all shaking hands with one another, asking one another how we did, and telling one another how glad we were to meet, and all talking at once. Mr. Peggotty was so proud and overjoyed to see us that he did not know what to say or do, but kept over and over again shaking hands with me, and then with Steerforth, and then with me, and then ruffling his shaggy hair all over his head, laughing with such glee means happiness, and triumph, that it was a treat to see him. "Why, that you two gentlemen growed. Should you come this here roof tonight?" "Of all nights in my life," said Mr. Peggotty, "is such a thing was ever happened afore? I do rightly believe. Emily, my darling, come here. Come here, my little witch. That's Master Davy's friend, my dear. That's the gentleman I've heard, as you've heard on, Emily. He comes to see you, along with Master Davy, and the brightest night of your uncle's life as ever was or will be Gorm, the t'other one, and horror for it." Okay, I think what happened was I misread this a little bit, because I think what happened was when they opened the door and came in, they didn't see them immediately, but there was already some excitement. Mrs. Gummidge was happy, everybody was happy. There was something happening that they interrupted, because now Mr. Peggotty is saying, "I can't believe that Davy and his friend came on the happiest night of my life." And it seems to do something with Ham and Emily. Maybe they're getting married. Ham is a young man that lives with them. I think he's I don't remember. I don't remember what their relationship is. Mr. Peggotty doesn't have a wife or children, but he takes care of people. So, for example, Miss Gummidge, her husband died. He was a fisherman. And Mr. Peggotty she's a miserable, horrible old woman, but Mr. Peggotty takes care of her because nobody else will. So she lives there, but she's always very sad and depressed. And Emily is his niece, so I think his brother, who was also a fisherman, died, and Mr. Peggotty takes care of her like a daughter. And I think Ham also, I don't remember their relationship, but somehow he's raised or taken care of Ham since he was little. And I'm wondering if maybe Ham and Emily have decided to get married. It seems like they were celebrating something before Davy and his friends entered. Okay, let's see. More reading and less talking. After delivering this speech, all in a breath and with extraordinary animation and pleasure, Mr. Peggotty put one of his large hands rapturously on each side of his niece's face, and kissing it 12 times, laid it with a gentle pride and love upon his broad chest, and patted it as if his hand had been a lady's. Then he let her go, and she ran into the little chamber where I used to sleep. Chamber is just another word for room. Looked round upon us, quite hot and out of breath, and with his uncommon satisfaction. If you two gentlemen growed now, and such gentlemen, said Mr. Peggotty. So there are, cried Ham. Well said. So there are, Master Davy bore gentlemen growed. So there are. Okay, I have no idea what they're talking about. If you two gentlemen growed, said Mr. Peggotty, don't excuse me for being in a state of mind when you understand matters. I'll arx your pardon. You know, there are some types of English where the letter R is inserted where it shouldn't be. So, for example, there are some people who say, instead of saying toilet, say turlet. It's very funny when you hear that. It's hard not to laugh. Or instead of saying wash, they say wersh. And Mr. Peggotty has this type of accent. So instead of saying ask, he says arcs. Let's see. I'll arx your pardon. I'll ask your pardon. Emily, my dear, she knows I'm going to tell. Here's his delight, broke out again, and has made off. To make off, remember, to make for something means to go for something, to go towards something because you have a purpose. And to make off means to run away for some reason. Like, maybe she's embarrassed or something like that. So she made off. Sometimes you use that with thieves, talking about thieves. The thieves made off with $1 million. They ran away with $1 million. They escaped with $1 million. Make off is kind of like escape. But maybe escape with a reason. So she knows I'm going to tell. So Mr. Peggotty is going to make an announcement. And so Emily ran away because she's embarrassed. She escaped. She made off because she's embarrassed. Here his delight broke out again, and has made off. Would you be so good as to look arter, mother, for a minute? So Mr. Peggotty is saying, I think he's telling Mrs. Gummidge to go check on Emily, to go find her. Mrs. Gummidge nodded and disappeared. If this ain't, said Mr. Peggotty, sitting down among us by the fire, the brightest night of my life. I'm a shellfish biled too. I have no idea. I'm a shellfish biled too, and more I can't say. This here little Emily, sir, in a low voice to Steerforth, here as you see, a blushing here. Just now, Steerforth only nodded, but with such a pleased an expression of interest and of participation in Mr. Peggotty's feelings that the latter answered him as if he had spoken. To be sure, said Mr. Peggotty, that's her, and so she is, thank ye, sir. Ham nodded to me several times, as if he would have said too. This here little Emily of ours, said Mr. Peggotty, has been in our house, what I suppose. I'm an ignorant man, but that's my belief. No one but a little bright-eyed creature can be in a house. She ain't my child. I never had one, but I couldn't love her more, you understand. I couldn't do it. I quite understand, said Steerforth. I know you do, sir, returned Mr. Peggotty, and thank ye again. Thank ye, thank you, but there's this other word, ye, which is the plural for you. Thank ye. That would be more formal. but that just becomes thank ye. Thank ye again, Master Davy. He can remember what she has. You may judge for your own self that she is, but neither of you can't fully know what she has been, is, and will be, to my loving art, to my loving heart. I'm rough, sir, said Mr. Peggotty. I'm as rough as a sea porcupine. But no one, unless mayhap it is a woman, can know, I think, what our little Emily is to me. And betwixt ourselves, betwixt is another word for between. And people still use that sometimes, but it just sounds kind of funny when you say that, betwixt. Just another way of saying between. Betwixt ourselves, sinking his voice. So that's between us, lower yet. That woman's name ain't Mrs. Gummidge, neither, though she has a world of merits. Mr. Peggotty ruffled his hair again with both hands, as a further preparation for what he was going to say, and went on, with a hand upon each of his knees. There was a certain person, as had knowed our Emily, for the time when her father was drownded. So to be drowned, not drowned, I guess that's a regional way of saying it, but to be drowned means to go underwater and die. So when her father was drowned, so there's someone who has known Emily ever since her father drowned, as had seen her constant, when a babby, when a young gal, when a woman, not much of a person to look at, he weren't, said Mr. Peggotty. So he's saying there's a man who has known Emily ever since she was a baby and has known her all her life as a little girl, as she's growing up, and now a woman. And he's not a very attractive man. He's not the most attractive man. That's why he says, not much to look at. When you say that something isn't much to look at, it means it isn't very attractive. It isn't very interesting to see. Not much of a person to look at, he weren't, said Mr. Peggotty. Something of my own build. So Mr. Peggotty, I think, is very stocky. He's kind of fat. So when he says something of my own build, that means he's kind of fat like me. But rough, a good deal of the sou'wester in him, wary salt, but on the whole, an honest sort of chap, with his art in the right place, with his heart in the right place. If your heart is in the right place, that means you always have good intentions. You never have bad intentions. I thought I'd never seen Ham grin to anything like the extent to which he sat grinning at us now. What does this here blessed tarpaulin go and do? Let's go see what a tarpaulin is. That sounds familiar, like we've looked that up before, but I don't know. Tarpaulin meaning. A heavy-duty waterproof cloth, originally as tarred with canvas. Oh, that's interesting. Because we still use this word, but it's abbreviated. So let me just show you what this is, because this could actually be a useful word. So this, you recognize this maybe as a cover, to cover property, maybe cover a car, to protect it from the weather. And we call that a tarp. But I guess that the full name, which I don't think people use anymore, I've never heard anybody use this word, is tarpaulin. Where did we see that word? What does this here blessed tarpaulin go and do? So he's calling Ham, I think, a tarpaulin. I don't know why. Said Mr. Peggotty with his face. One high noon of enjoyment, but he loses that there heart of his to our little Emily. So he's saying Ham has fallen in love with Emily. Well, this is bad news because Davy's in love with Emily. He's been in love with Emily since he met her many years ago when they were little children. He follows her about. He follows her everywhere. He makes himself a sort of servant to her. He loses in a great measure his relish for his victuals. That means food. So he's lost interest in food. And in the long run, he makes it clear to me what's amiss. So in the long run, he tells me what's wrong. Now I could wish myself, you see, that our little Emily was in fair way of being married. I could wish to see her, at all events, under articles to an honest man, as had the right to defend her. I don't know how long I may live or how soon I may die, but I know that if I was capsized, capsizing is when a boat is on the water, but then the water turns it the other way around. So the boat goes upside down in the water, and that's a very bad thing. Probably most of the people in a capsized boat could die or something. So if I was capsized, if I was on the boat, because he's a fisherman, so if that happened to him, where the water turns the boat upside down and he dies, any night in a gale of wind, a gale is a very strong wind, in Yarmouth roads here, and was to see the town lights shining for the last time over the rowers, as I couldn't make no head against. I could go down quieter for thinking, there's a man ashore there, iron true to my little Emily. God bless her, and no wrong can touch my Emily, while so be as that man is alive. So Mr. Peggotty is saying, I would just be happy if a really good man loved Emily. But I think now he's going to say, but I can't believe it's Ham. Now I'm double happy. I'm triple happy that it's Ham. Mr. Peggotty, in simple earnestness, waved his right arm as if he were waving at the town lights, saying goodbye to the town forever because he's dying for the last time, and then exchanging a nod with Ham, whose eyes he caught, proceeded as before, well, I counsels him to speak to Emily. He's big enough, but he's bashfuller than a little un, and he don't like. So Ham tells Mr. Peggotty, oh, I'm in love with Emily. I want to marry Emily. And Mr. Peggotty says, that's great. Go talk to her. Go propose marriage to her. But Ham is a big, strong guy, but he's very shy. He can't do it. He's bashful. He's shy. So I speak. What? Him? Says Emily. Him? That I'd knowed so intimate so many years and liked so much? Oh, uncle, I never can have him. So she said no. He's such a good fellow. I gives her a kiss. And I says no more to her than, my dear, you're right to speak out. You're to choose for yourself. You're as free as a little bird. Then I always to him, and I says, I aways to him. So then I go to him and I say, I wish it could have been so, but it can't. But you can both be as you was. And what I say to you is, be as you was with her like a man. So he's saying, so he goes to Ham and he says, I'm sorry, she said no. But try to go back to the way things were when you were really good friends. He says to me, a shake in my hand, I will, he says. And he was honorable and manful, and for 2 years going on, and we was just the same at home here as afore. So Ham tried to get along with her, and everything was fine for 2 years. Mr. Peggotty's face, which had varied in its expression with the various stages of his narrative, now resumed all of its former triumphant delight. As he laid a hand upon my knee and a hand upon Steerforth's, previously wetting them both for the greater emphasis of his action, and divided the following speech between us. All of a sudden, one evening, as it might be tonight, comes little Emily from her work, and him with her. There ain't so much in what you'll say, no, because he takes care on her, like a brother, arter dark, and indeed afore dark, and at all times. But this tarpaulin chap, he takes hold of her hand, and he cries out to me joyful, "Look here! This is to be my little wife." And she says, half bold and half shy, and half laughing and half crying, "Yes, uncle, if you please, if I please," cried Mr. Peggotty. "If I please," cried Mr. Peggotty, rolling his head in ecstasy at the idea. "Lord, as if I should do anything else. If you please, I'm steadier now, and I have thought better of it, and I'll be as good a little wife as I can to him, for he's a dear good fellow." Then Miss Gummidge, she claps her hands like a play, and you come in. "There, the murder's out," said Mr. Peggotty. "You come in. It took place this here present hour, and here's the man that'll marry her the minute she's out of her time." So what happened is that for 2 years they just carried on like before, but then suddenly, for some reason, Emily changed her mind and agreed to marry her, and she just said yes. Just at that moment when Davy came in, they had announced that Emily agreed to marry Ham. Ham staggered as well as he might under the blow of Mr. Peggotty dealt him of his unbounded joy. So staggering is when you try to walk and you can't, you miss some steps. And Mr. Peggotty's a big strong man, and he's so happy he hit Ham on the back, and Ham moved forward. Ham staggered as well he might under the blow. Blow is a hit that Mr. Peggotty dealt him on his unbounded joy. As a mark of confidence and friendship, but feeling called upon to say something to us, he said with much faltering and great difficulty, "She weren't no higher than you was, Master Davy, when you first come, when I thought what she'd growed up to be. I see her grown up, gentleman, like a flower. I'd lay down my life for her, Master Davy. Oh, most content and cheerful. She's more to me, gentlemen, than she's all to me that ever I can want, and more than ever I could say. I love her true. There ain't a gentleman in all the land, nor yet sailing upon the sea, that can love this lady more than I love her, though there's many a common man would say better what he meant." So basically, Mr. Peggotty is just saying, I love her very much. Nobody could love her more than I love her. I thought it affecting to see such a sturdy fellow as Ham, sturdy means like big and strong, was now trembling is like shaking, in the strength of what he felt for the pretty little creature who had won his heart. So Ham's this big, strong, fat man, and Emily said that she would marry him, and it's making him look very weak. It's kind of interesting, an interesting contrast. I thought the simple confidence reposed in us by Mr. Peggotty and by himself was in itself affecting. I was affected by the story altogether. How far my emotions were influenced by the recollections of my childhood, I don't know. Whether I had come there with any lingering fancy. Remember that word linger means don't go away. And fancy means love or like. So he's kind of thinking, I'm not sure what I was expecting when I came there. Like, maybe I still had this lingering fancy, I still had this love for her staying that doesn't go away. But he couldn't remember if he actually felt that or expected to start some kind of relationship with Emily. Whether I had come there with any lingering fancy and that I was still to love little Emily, I don't know. I know that I was filled with pleasure by all of this, but at first with an undescribably sensitive pleasure. that very little would have changed to pain. Therefore, if it had depended upon me to touch the prevailing chord among them with any skill, I should have made a poor hand of it. But it depended on Steerforth, and he did it with such address, and in a few minutes we were all easy and happy as it was possible to be. Mr. Peggotty, he said, as a thoroughly good fellow, you are a thoroughly good fellow, and deserve to be as happy as you are tonight. My hand upon it, Ham. I give you joy, my boy. My hand upon that, too. Daisy, stir the fire, and make it a brisk one. And Mr. Peggotty, unless you can induce your gentle niece to come back, for whom I vacate this seat in the corner, I shall go. Any gap at your fireside on such a night, such a gap, least of all, I wouldn't make for the wealth of the Indies. So Mr. Peggotty went into my old room to fetch. To fetch something means to go and get something. So Mr. Peggotty went into my old room to go and get little Emily, to fetch little Emily. At first little Emily didn't like to come, and then Ham went. Presently they brought her to the fireside, very much confused and very shy. But she soon became more assured when she found how gently and respectfully Steerforth spoke to her, how skillfully he avoided anything that would embarrass her, how he talked to Mr. Peggotty of boats and ships and tides and fish, how he referred to me about the time we had seen Mr. Peggotty at Salem House, how delighted he was with the boat and all belonging to it, how lightly and easily he carried on until he had brought us, by degrees, into a charmed circle, and we were all talking away without any reserve. Emily, indeed, said little all evening, but she looked and listened, and her face got animated, and she was charming. Steerforth told a story of a dismal shipwreck which arose out of his talk with Mr. Peggotty, as if he saw it all before him, and little Emily's eyes were fastened on him all the time, as if she saw it too. He told us a merry adventure of his own as a relief to that, with as much gaiety, remember gaiety just means happiness, as if the narrative were as fresh to him as it was to us. And little Emily laughed until the boat rang with musical sounds, and we all laughed, Steerforth too, in irresistible sympathy with what was so pleasant and light-hearted. He got Mr. Peggotty to sing, or rather to roar. When the stormy winds do blow, do blow, do blow, he sang a sailor's song himself, so pathetically and beautifully that I could have almost fancied that the real wind creeping sorrowfully round the house and murmuring low through our unbroken silence was there to listen. As to Mrs. Gummidge, who roused that victim of despondency with a success never attained by anyone else, so Mr. Peggotty informed me, since the decease of the old one, he left her so little leisure for being miserable that she said the next day she thought she must have been bewitched. So Mrs. Gummidge is always in a bad mood. She's always depressed and crying, but they made sure to entertain her all night so that she didn't have an opportunity to feel sorry for herself or depressed or sad. And the next day she was confused by that, and she thought, what happened last night? Why was I in such a good mood? That's so strange for me. But he set up no monopoly of the general attention or the conversation. When little Emily grew more courageous and talked, but still bashfully, across the fire to me, of our old wanderings up and down the beach to pick up shells and pebbles, and when I asked her if she recollected how I used to be devoted to her, and we both laughed and reddened, casting these looks back on the pleasant old times, so unreal to look at now, he was silent and attentive and observed us thoughtfully. She sat at this time and all the evening on the old locker in her old little corner by the fire. Ham beside her, where I used to sit. I could not satisfy myself whether it was in her own little tormenting way or in a maidenly reserve before us that she kept quite close to the wall and away from him. But I observed that she did so all that evening. So Ham is sitting next to her, where Davy and Emily used to sit together all the time. But Emily doesn't look comfortable. She's kind of sitting away from Ham like this. And Davy's not sure why, whether she's embarrassed because she agreed to marry him, or whether she's embarrassed because she and Davy used to, well, they were just little kids, but they had kind of like a little kid love affair. They didn't do anything, but that's kind of interesting that, you know, they just agreed to get married and she's kind of sitting away from him like that. As I remember, it was almost midnight when we took our leave. We had some biscuit and dried fish for supper, and Steerforth had produced from his pocket a full flask of Hollands, which we men, and I may say we men now, without a blush, had emptied. So Steerforth had a little bottle of alcohol with him, and they shared it. All of the men shared it. We parted merrily, and as they all stood crowded round the door to light us off as far as they could upon the road, I saw the sweet blue eyes of little Emily peeping after us from behind Ham, and heard her soft voice calling to us to be careful how we went. "A most engaging little beauty," said Steerforth, taking my arm. "Well, it's a quaint place, and they are quaint company, and it's quite a new sensation to mix with them. How fortunate we are." "How fortunate we are, too," I returned, "to have arrived to witness their happiness in that intended marriage. I never saw people so happy. How delightful to see it, and to be made the sharers in their honest joy, as we have been." That's a rather chuckle-headed fellow for the girl, isn't it? He said. I'm not sure how he's using chuckle. To me, chuckle means laugh. Chuckle. That's chuckling. A chuckle-headed fellow. I think what he means is like a stupid-looking guy. Let's see. That's how I'm interpreting it here. "That's a rather chuckle-headed fellow for the girl, isn't it?" said Steerforth. "Because Emily's very pretty, and Ham's like a big, fat, strong fisherman." He had been so hearty with him, and with them all, that I felt a shock in this unexpected cold reply. So Davy's surprised, like suddenly Steerforth is insulting Ham after they leave, and Davy's very surprised by that. But turning quickly upon him and seeing a laugh in his eyes, I answered, much relieved, "Oh, Steerforth, it's well for you to joke about the poor. You may skirmish with Miss Dartle or try to hide your sympathies and jest from me, but I know better. When I see how perfectly you understand them, how exquisitely you can enter into happiness, like this plain fisherman's, or humor a love like my old nurse's. I know that there is not a joy or sorrow, not an emotion of such people, that can be indifferent to you. And I admire and love you for it, Steerforth, 20 times and more." He stopped, and looking in my face, "Daisy, I believe you're in earnest and are good. I wish we all were." Next moment, he was gaily singing Mr. Peggotty's song as we walked at a round pace back to Yarmouth. Okay. Wow. Well, that was pretty long. It was a pretty long chapter, but we made it through. Thank you, everyone who stayed and watched into the end, and I'll see you again soon. I think tomorrow morning I'll be reading Brave New World, Chapter 4, probably around 7 o'clock. So thank you for staying, and I'll see you next time. Have a good night. Goodbye.